Last week we saw Jesus being visited by the shepherds. This week we're also going to see him visited by the wise men. But not everybody was overjoyed about meeting Jesus. We're going to see how was the young Jesus loved and hated. Why did the Magi want to find Jesus? And when we hear Magi, sometimes you might also hear the wise men. And that's something that you'll see on both ends. Magi and wise men. These are people that were wise and often gave advice. So we want to know why they wanted to find Jesus. We're going to start reading from Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in Judea, the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem. So Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but then he was in Jerusalem at the time. So remember, after 8 days, he went to the temple. So he was at the time in Jerusalem. Reading on in verse 2, and asked, "Where is the one who has been born, King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose, and have come to worship him." So the wise men saw this star, and they said, "We need to go follow this star to find Jesus." The Magi wanted to worship the young Jesus. They wanted no harm. They were overjoyed to hear that Jesus was born, their Savior was born, and they wanted to visit him. So you can see it's a little bit hard to see, but this bright star, the Magi were there, these wise men were there to follow the star to find Jesus. Why did Herod want to find Jesus? So this is another person that we're going to see wanting to find Jesus. In verse 3, we will read, "When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him." Herod's the first person we've seen so far that's not happy about Jesus being born. He was disturbed. He was frustrated. Who is this King Jesus? In verse 4, we read, "When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born." So Herod knew that this Jesus was talked about in the Old Testament, and he was wondering where Jesus was going to be born. Then all of King Herod's people answered, "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." So the people around Herod were really smart people. They knew exactly all about Jesus, all the prophecies that have been told about him, and were very knowledgeable about his life. I'm going to read on from verse 7. "Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared." So he's trying to find out, how old is this baby Jesus? We'll see why in verse 8. "He sent them to Bethlehem and said, 'Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me so that I too may go and worship him.'" So Herod's saying, hey, I want to go and worship Jesus. Herod wanted to destroy the young Jesus. And right at the end, it seems like he doesn't want to destroy Jesus. He's saying, I want to worship him too. But we see also that Herod isn't excited about Jesus being born, so he doesn't really want to go and worship him. What did the Magi do when they found Jesus? In verse 9 and 10, it says, "After they had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed." So this star was one that God was leading the wise men straight to Jesus. It went right over Jesus' house so that the wise men were able to find him. In verse 11, it says, "On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh." So, frankincense and myrrh were types of incense that people would burn, but oftentimes these gifts were ones that Mary and Joseph might sell for money. So that it wasn't that they necessarily use them, but they might sell them in order to have money. In verse 12, we keep reading. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. So, in a dream, an angel came to them and said, don't go back. Herod doesn't want to worship Jesus, he wants to hurt Jesus. Go home a different way. Don't go back to Herod. And the Magi did exactly that. The Magi worshiped Jesus as king and gave him valuable gifts. The Magi worshiped Jesus as king, but Herod wanted to destroy him. We are going to go through the worksheet. Make sure that it always makes sense when you are finished. So part one, it's just true or false, and then you'll have letters that spell it out. So it says Jesus was born in Jerusalem. That is false. Jesus was born not in Jerusalem, but we know in Bethlehem. You don't need to write in the correct thing, but then you'd circle false. Herod was the high priest. That we know is also true. He was not the high priest. Herod was the king at the time. Magi came from the east to find Jesus. We know that from our story today that is true. The Magi were led by a special star. We know that is also true. We see the Magi found Jesus in the palace. We know that Jesus was not in the palace. Herod was overjoyed about Jesus' birth. I know that that's false. He wasn't overjoyed. He was actually very jealous. Herod wondered where Jesus was born. We know that that's true because he wanted to find him. And then, again, it's the same thing. Herod wondered where Jesus had been born. We know that if it's true here, it's also true here. So then it's going to say the letters you have circled spell the words that complete this sentence. The wise men wanted to worship the blank of the blank. So I'm going to go ahead. Okay. I-N-G. That makes sense, that word right there, king of the, and then we'll go down to the bottom, Jews, Jews. That sentence right away makes sense. The wise men wanted to worship the king of the Jews. So you can go ahead and work on this bottom part on your own. Make sure then that the word also makes sense at the bottom. We worship Jesus as our blank and blank. So if these words don't make sense, double check that you have it right up here.